Hello, my name is Dakota and there are two things that you should know about me. One is that I love books and two is that I love art. So this video is going to be books that I love about art. Art is a broad and all-encompassing term. It can mean so many things. There's so many different bodies and mediums of art and so many ways to express oneself via art, and to recommend books based on this would be a very broad thing, and I would be able to talk about that forever and ever. So for the sake of this video, we're going to limit it to visual art, painting, sketches, that kind of thing. I have so many favorite artists and so many favorite pieces of art and so many favorite mediums of art and just topics about art in general, but I'm going to recommend to you today 5 very specific books about art that I love, that I have read. And this is for 2 reasons. This is so I can keep it very open for a part 2 if we like this and want more explorations on books about art, and also so I can have a little bit more time with each book to divulge them to you truly and deeply and ramble about them and why they mean so much to me and why I am recommending them to you. To reiterate, this is some of my favorite art, not all of my favorite art, and without further ado, here is 5 books that I love about art. The first book is a memoir from Marina Abramovic, this one right here, and it is called Walk Through Walls. I've admired Marina's work for a really long time, but not been too necessarily familiar with it, and then I was hunting down her memoir for a while, secondhand of course, and I finally found it and I read it, and I'm gonna read you the blurb. At the start of all these books I'll read you the blurb, then I'll talk about my interpretation of them and why I think you should read them. So here's the blurb. In 2010, over 750,000 people waited in line at Marina Abramovic's MoMA retrospective for a chance to sit across from her in an unprecedented durational performance that lasted more than 700 hours. This celebration of nearly 50 years of groundbreaking performance art demonstrated once again that Marina Abramovic is truly a force of nature. The child of communist war hero parents under Tito's regime in post-war Yugoslavia, she was raised with a relentless work ethic. Even as she was beginning to build an international artistic career, Marina lived at home under her mother's abusive control, strictly obeying a 10 p.m. curfew. But nothing could quell her insatiable curiosity, her desire to connect with people, or her distinctly Balkan sense of humor, all of which informs her art and her life. Marina's story, in turn moving, epic, and dryly funny, informs an incomparable artistic career that involves pushing her body past the limits of fear, pain, exhaustion, and danger in an uncompromising quest for emotional and spiritual transformation. Walk Through Walls is a vivid and powerful rendering of the unparalleled life of an extraordinary artist. After reading this book and after doing a lot more personal research in Marina and her work, I can confidently say she is up there with one of my favorite living artists of all time everywhere in the world. She's absolutely incredible, and I've never come across somebody with such intense, unbridled commitment and devotion and passion to their work. I feel it is, I might not be right with this, correct me if I'm wrong if anyone knows, but I feel that it is ghostwritten or transcribed via conversations, because the writing is very simplistic and very basic, and you know, when something just feels ghostwritten, it doesn't feel like it could have as much detail as it could from a personalized perspective. But this is one of the few books in the entire world that I've read that I will confidently say it works for, because Marina's life story is so intense and it's sheer chaos and it's beautiful and it's all of these things at once, and to have that laid out quite simply is the best way to digest it. The things that I would do to pick this woman's mind, or at least just witness one of her performances in the flesh, I would do anything. She's one of my biggest inspirations in the art world, and if you Google her name or YouTube her name, you'll come up with so many things to look at. Some of my favorite pieces from her, there's so many to think of, but Rest Energy is an incredible one. She was on the arrow end of a bow and arrow with complete trust with someone else holding the other end, and they were just staring at each other, and her heart was racing, and I can't explain it the way that it should be explained, so just look up Rest Energy, it's fascinating. And also Rhythm Zero, incredible stuff, so unique and so devoted, and I can't put into words how incredible it is and how much I think everyone should know about this. I hope we've been noticing my Mona Lisa Da Vinci mug with my, am I gonna tip it? Am I gonna tip it? Am I gonna tip it? It's just black coffee. This is a completely irrelevant side note between book recommendations, but ever since I started taking my coffee black, I don't think I could ever have it with milk or sugar or sweetener ever again. Iced coffees just don't hit the same anymore, you know, black coffee is where it's at. I really recommend black coffee, and my transition from the processed milky sugary coffee was just a little bit of honey in black coffee, and it's such a little treat. This is the perfect segue, if you will, into this book right here, and it is no less Leonardo from Frank Zollner. And obviously it's a biography of Leonardo da Vinci and some of his works. Because it is very obviously a biography of Leonardo da Vinci and detailing some of his works, it does not have a blurb. I've got a little artist profile of Da Vinci, which we all know Da Vinci, we all know who he is, but there is a reason I am fascinated with him, which I will talk about after. Like, obviously he's a very known painter with very known paintings. Just listen, hear me out. I keep on saying hear me out, like you're gonna cut me off when it's a YouTube video. One of the great Renaissance painters, Leonardo da Vinci continually tested artistic traditions and techniques. He created innovative compositions, investigated anatomy to accurately represent the human body, considered the human psyche to illustrate character, and experimented with methods of representing space and three-dimensional objects on a two-dimensional surface. The result of his inexhaustible curiosity is many unfinished projects, but also some of the most lifelike, complex, and tender representations of human nature. His experiments influenced the art of his successors and often became the standard of representation in subsequent centuries. So my fascination with Da Vinci and his work started 6 or so years ago when I went to the Louvre for the first time, and it was midsummer and I lined up for 3 hours on my own amongst a bunch of sweaty tourists in the stinking, sweltering heat. We're all stood like this, crammed like sardines in a tin, waiting to see the Mona Lisa. When we finally got to the Mona Lisa, we had about 15 glorious seconds to see her between the cracks between other people's heads and through other people's phone screens, because, you know, it's a free-for-all there. It was interesting to me because obviously the Mona Lisa is a beautiful painting, but if you've been to the Louvre, you'll know that the entire room that she is in is filled with so many other paintings. So many other brilliant, interesting, incredible paintings, and she is the one that steals all the limelight, and she is, in fact, the most famous piece of art in the entire world. I could ramble about, or more so info dump, on this specific topic for hours on end without coming up for air, so I'll save you that, but it's also because it's a huge key point or inspirational point or motif in an upcoming project of mine, which I'm sure some of you know about because I've only recently learned the art of keeping my mouth shut. But for the sake of communicating to you why this is so important to me, let me explain a little bit. Here is my little piece. She was painted somewhere in the early 1500s by, of course, Da Vinci. She is comprised of oil paint on poplar wood. She's likely a commissioned portrait of a cloth merchant's wife, Lisa del Giocondo. Mona means Madonna, Madonna means my lady Lisa. She lived in the Louvre for a very long time. She wasn't necessarily sensationalized as she is today. Of course, the brushwork is incredible, but she wasn't the most famous piece of art in the world until in 1911, she was stolen from the Louvre. It was the absence and the mystery of the absence that forged the enigmatic figure that she is today and the questions that she poses to the art world. How did she become to be so special, so glorified, so famous, the most known piece of art in all of art history? Is she art or is she relic? I mean, sure, the technique is obviously incredible, and the emotion behind her eyes so menacing, and that smile so nuanced and secretive. She knows something that we don't, of course, but have you seen Ivan the Terrible's eyes in Ilya Repin's Ivan the Terrible and his son Ivan? The sheer turmoil after he realizes what he has done to his son in a fit of rage as he holds his dying son in his arms. Anyway, my favorite work of Da Vinci's is Virgin of the Rocks. We have more books to talk about, but before we continue, let's have a quick word from today's brilliant sponsor, Squarespace. I've worked with Squarespace many times before, and I love Squarespace because it is a platform that makes creating and maintaining websites simple and fun, which is perfect for passion projects turned professional. It's perfect for anything from online stores to blogs to things that are very helpful, and I'm in the midst of redesigning my own website. If you know me, you know that I am a perfectionist, much to my own detriment, but what I love about Squarespace is it makes this process so so easy and I am in full control. The fluid engine design system from Squarespace means it's never been easier for you to unlock your creativity. I can play around with elements like email campaigns, member areas, appointments, custom merch. I could keep going. It's so simple and so worth it and so important when it comes to having a presence, and it's also just fun to design and play with. You can go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch your own website, go to squarespace.com/dakotawarren and save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. The next book is by Hans Belting, and it is Hieronymus Bosch's The Garden of Earthly Delights. And if you don't know what this is, it is a great, incredible, fascinating painting from Hieronymus Bosch. Hieronymus Bosch's The Garden of Earthly Delights has never ceased to fire our imagination and is arguably one of the greatest works in history of art. Fantastic landscapes in which humans, animals, and fabulous creatures live together in paradisiacal harmony are contrasted with apocalyptic images of fighting ships and explosions, which some scholars have interpreted as far-sighted visions of wars to come. The author, Hans Belting, avoids interpreting Garden of Earthly Delights as a heretical masterpiece or as a highly individual illustration of the creation. Instead, he interprets it as a painted utopia, inviting comparisons with reports of the New World at the court of Brussels. The work depicts the artist's vision of humankind in a paradise untouched by the fall. It gets me so excited just reading that. If you know me, you will know that this is one of my favorite pieces of art ever in the whole entire world. It means so much to me. If you've not heard of it, look at it. Just look at a picture of it, research it, do whatever you will. I implore you, just get this on your radar if it isn't already. It's a kind of painting that you could look at for hours and hours and hours on end, and what I love so much about this piece is the mentality and the mind of the artist as this was being created. When I really particularly adore a piece of art, I can't help but seek more context via the memoir or a snippet of the life story of the artist who was creating the piece of art. And coincidentally, all my favorite pieces of art and all my favorite artists are slightly mad or very mad and dealing or grappling somehow with the notion of religion or religious trauma. I have a type, and I'm not going to deny it. I love so much more of Bosch's work, of course, but this particular piece is a really in-depth exploration of the Garden of Earthly Delights, which it just means so much to me. And I can't explain to you why it means so much to me. You know, it's a feeling, it's an interpretation, and that's why I'm telling you to look at it and read it, because I have a feeling it could mean a lot to you if it doesn't already, which it probably does because it's very famous. Very, very, very famous painting. I'm not groundbreaking research here. I'm pretty sure it's been stationed since like the 1930s or the 1940s in Madrid at the Museo del Prado, if I'm not mistaken. And so I really need to organize a trip to Madrid to see this in the flesh, because this will be a pivotal point in my life. Well, not in the flesh, I suppose, behind many layers of protective glass, but alas, I want to put this on your radar, so here you go. The next book I have is a book on Francisco Goya. The text is by Frederick S. White, the director of Art Galleries, University of California at Los Angeles. And I picked this up, all of these books, not all of them actually, most of them are secondhand, and so I'm not sure if you'll be able to find this exact mini little book on Goya, but I'm sure that any book will do, quite frankly. I'll read you the blurb. Goya's art constitutes one of the most eloquent, irresistible, and profoundly tragic statements of his century. Few could have surmised the final character of his work from the charming and carefree tapestry designs he painted as a young man in Madrid. Appointed official painter to the Spanish king, he began to paint the corrupt grandees of the court, and his art grew more scathing and uncompromising. Goya lived in a period of war, revolution, and massive social crisis, and his paintings sum up that epoch. In their own time, they became a savage reproach to all those who chose to ignore the deepening catastrophe of Spanish life. The artist was attacked in the Inquisition and finally forced into exile, dying in France in 1828. He left behind an enduring and priceless life work, magnificent etchings, some of the most beautiful and probing portraits ever painted, and sublime and fantastic creations in which he mercilessly exposed man's vanities, stupidities, and brutalities as few artists have ever dared to do. I don't need to explain to you, based on that blurb, why Goya is one of my favorite artists of all time, but I mean, the art speaks for itself. I knew of Goya previously, but one time I visited an exhibition at the National Gallery of Victoria in Melbourne of Goya's works, and that sucked me in completely, and I was fascinated from that moment onwards. His works are so, they feel so, I don't know how to explain it apart from this singular word, but they feel so damning. When I look at them, I feel like there's no hope. I feel scared. I feel creeped out. I feel a little ill, but it's beautiful. It's not like an unsafe feeling. I'm trying to describe this as best as I can when it's more of an energy that you pick up on. If you're into the morbid kind of art, like I so obviously am, look into Goya. Goya is of course another very famous artist, so again, I'm not discovering anything new here. I love his earlier works. His sketches are incredible. There's so much to look at if you start to deep dive or even just scratch the surface of Goya's life work, but some of my favorite pieces, the obvious choices, but you know, I suppose you'll resonate with these too. I'm addressing you personally, I like this. Witch's Sabbat is a very famous one, very beautiful one, and of course, one of my favorites of all time, Saturn devouring his son. The next book I don't have the physical copy of because it is in storage halfway across the planet before I decided to move, but it is The Mission of Art from Alex Grey. Let me just Google a blurb for you real quick, give me a second. This is an inspirational book about art's power to bring about personal catharsis and spiritual awakening. Alex Grey's reflections combine his extensive knowledge of art history and his own first-hand experiences in creating art on the boundaries of consciousness. Included are practical techniques and exercises that can be used to explore the spiritual dimension of art. Challenging and thought-provoking, the mission of art will be enjoyed by everyone who has ever contemplated the deeper purpose of artistic expression. I want to talk more about this book because it has its appeals, but it also has some deterring factors. First and foremost, the kind of art that Alex Grey produces, whilst obviously incredible and fascinating and hypnotizing, is not the kind of art that I usually gravitate towards. It's a matter of taste. I can see the beauty and the brilliance in his works, but it's not something I'd put on my walls. I came across this book in a thrift store when I was a lot younger, and I didn't necessarily resonate with the art, but I was fascinated by it, and then I quickly became fascinated by the artist's ethos, and that is why I read the book. As I said, I read this book when I was a fair bit younger, and it was fascinating. It was truly brilliant, and I'm so glad that I read it when I did. I felt it was the perfect thing to connect me on my artistic journey and connect that to my life journey, if that makes sense. It's a fascinating manifesto on art history and art connection and art spirituality, and I love the way that it challenges nihilism, because a nihilistic life is no way to live when art exists. This glorious, beautiful thing full of life and light. I have interesting feelings regarding nihilism, and I'll talk about that another time because this video is not about nihilism. Back on track, I flipped through this book again when I was packing it up, packing all my books up, my little library away in storage as I moved halfway across the world suddenly. I always have felt fondness for this book, but as I was flipping through, I remembered little bits and pieces that, as I've developed as a person, don't resonate anymore. Alex Grey does have this thing where he deems other artists and other bodies of art as good or bad, which, if you know me, you know I feel very, very, very passionate about. I have an entire video rambling on that called The Importance of Making Bad Art. Watch that if you'd like. Alex Grey tries to put words in these other artists' mouth, and from their perspective he tries to speak on what their art's about and the emotional reasoning and whether it's actually genuine or not, which, you know, who is he to do for someone else's art? And it's interesting because it's a tricky and fickle thing deeming something else as good or bad when you create something yourself, and who the hell is anyone to call anything good or bad? It's this strange web of self-actualization tied with egolessness, because Alex Grey does have this thing where he preaches obviously about new age spirituality and egolessness and the importance of all of that in art, and then proceeds to call other artists good or bad. So it's this interesting web, and perhaps I need to read it again as an adult with a more developed frontal lobe and artistic sense of style. But it does seem a little bit contradictory. So, you know, I'm letting you know so you can take it with a grain of salt, because there are some brilliant, incredible, amazing points made in that book, and some of it is, dare I say, life-changing, or was life-changing. But then again, you know, it is kind of, as you can probably see if you know of his art, it is new age, pseudo-scientific, spiritual kind of energy around it, if you're into that. This is quite the stark contrast between everything else I'm recommending. Take it all with a grain of salt. Take everything I say with a grain of salt. I am just a girl in my bedroom talking about books on the internet. On that note, I should probably leave. I do have so many more recommendations, but as I said, I'm leaving this open-ended, so perhaps we can speak about this again later. And if you have anything to say or any recommendations or anything, do engage in the comments. Thank you for being here. I almost just fell off my chair. Thank you for being here. I love you inordinately. I am going to go read some more, maybe edit or something. I'm just filling you in on my day. I love you a lot.